Manchester is one of the places where we've seen a tremendous response in the last week against Trump. A demonstration last Monday of, 10,000 people, a fantastic response, and then 3,000 or so at the weekend. Both tremendous mobilisations, tremendous spirit, lots of new people involved, lots of young people involved, lots of women involved, and it's a symbol of the sense that history is speeding up at the moment. I come from London. There was a demonstration on the Monday of around 30,000 people around Downing Street, fantastic demonstration, and then at the weekend a demonstration of 40,000 people. And the reason that's happening, we know why it's happening, is because Trump is an immense threat and a challenge to all of us, on the left of course, but he's a vile racist. He wants to take away women's rights, he wants to take away LGBT+ rights, he wants to attack migrants and Muslims, and the one thing you can be sure about Trump is that yesterday he did something terrible, today he's done something terrible, and tomorrow he'll do something terrible. And therefore he is an immense challenge, an immense threat, because what he's doing is appalling, and if he gets away with it, he aims to roll back all the gains that were won through the struggles of the 1960s. All the gains for women's rights, for gay rights, for lesbian rights, for workers' rights, for civil rights. He aims to roll all those back and to institute a society where profit rules, where people have their rights stripped away from them. And it's a very, very big challenge. I mean, think about the immediate cause, if you like, of the demonstrations that have taken place. The decision to ban all travel from 7 predominantly Muslim countries, to say that refugees will be stopped coming for 120 days, and Syrian refugees will be stopped indefinitely from coming. An extraordinary attack, which has led to an immense response, presently enmeshed in the American judicial system, going through the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and will probably end up in the Supreme Court at some point. And when a judge says that what Trump has done is unconstitutional and so on, Trump hammers back at him on Twitter, this so-called judge. And if there's any terrorist incident in America in the future, the judge will be to blame, the blood will be on his hands. Extraordinary bullying arrogance towards the judges. I mean, I'm going to talk about the threat to the left and to women and to black people and to Muslims and migrants and so on. He is also an extraordinarily volatile element in terms of the ruling class in America. He wasn't the choice of the ruling class, in truth. If you look at it, the vast majority of billionaires in America gave their money towards Hillary Clinton, not towards Trump, because he is this volatile element. I brought along with me The Economist, the boss's magazine in Britain, which you can see, you can probably see it, an inserted in the White House, which has, Trump throwing a petrol bomb. That's their image of what Trump is about. There's this force which is going to pull away all the carefully negotiated deals that Obama did, for example, to isolate China, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that will tear up the carefully put together alliances to protect American imperialism. This very volatile character. And I mean, I don't want to go through all his crimes. I could spend the whole evening and much longer going through the crimes of Trump. He's only been there a couple of weeks, but it's perfectly possible to do that. But just look at the people who have been appointed to his leading circles in the last 48 hours. First of all, Betsy DeVos, the woman who will be in charge of education. A woman who has spent her whole career trying to do away with state education. So the person who will be in charge of education in America has spent her whole career trying to do away with state education and to privatise it. She's funded this thing with a leading theory called the Action Institute. One of its central elements was the privatisation of state education and the removal of laws upon child labour. If you look at the website, it talks about how wonderful it must have been to have been a coal miner in Victorian England, for example. I mean, I kid you not. This is the woman in charge of education in America. Her Senate hearings were so embarrassing that even two of the Republicans voted against her. She was only pushed through on the casting vote of Mike Pence, the Vice President, the only time this had ever happened in the American system. One of the most appalling moments was when one of the senators talked to her about, do you believe that guns should be kept out of schools? And she said, no, I don't, because they might be needed against grizzly bears. I kid you not. These are the people who are in charge of education in America. The deputy director of the CIA, who was appointed this week, a woman called Gina Haspel, who we did her in Socialist Worker this week, we had an article about her. No picture exists of Gina Haspel in the whole world. This is almost unknown. You search on Google Images, you can find nearly anyone in the world. No picture of Gina Haspel exists. The CIA press release does not have a picture of her because she's been a spook, a spy for so long inside the CIA that no one has a picture of her. You get a prize if anyone can provide a picture of Gina Haspel. Thank you for it. Gina Haspel, her claim to fame was that she ran one of the secret prisons, the black sites as they were called, which carried out torture against people swept up in Afghanistan and Iraq. In particular, in her case, Abu Zuaida and Abdul Rahim al-Nashiri, who were tortured in a black site prison, a secret prison in other words, under extraordinary rendition, in Thailand, where they were taken, swept off the battlefield and taken to Thailand. And she presided over the torture of Zubaida, who was waterboarded, you know, that taking people to the edge of death and bringing them back again, 83 times in the course of a month. 83 times in the course of a month, until the CIA decided actually he had nothing to say. They tortured him so much and they got nothing from him that they gave up after a month of it. Now, she was in charge of what is an extraordinary crime. An extraordinary crime. Her next job was to destroy the videotapes of the interrogation, because they taped it all. Her next job was to destroy the videotapes, which she then carried out on behalf of the CIA. That woman has now been made the deputy director of the CIA. Someone who has carried out some of the vilest crimes as a result of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then they have to choose someone to be the Labour Secretary. Someone who is in charge of implementing the very weak labour laws in America. So who do they choose? Someone who has broken all the labour laws in America. A man called Andy Pudzer, who ran a fast food joint called Hardee's, which under his management insisted, for example, in Pennsylvania that workers had to pay 10 cents an hour out of their wages for their uniforms that they wore. In order to have the honour of wearing the uniform, they had to do this. He also instituted in Georgia that when it was a bit slow in the restaurants, people had to clock out so they didn't get paid for it and wait in the car park until people started coming into the restaurant again, at which point they could clock in again and start getting paid. This is the man now in charge of labour laws in America. So it's a vision of the most rapacious, vicious, arrogant, bullying types imaginable. It really, and we have to get the sense of what's going on here, that if they get away with it, they will turn the clock back a very, very long way. And, you know, I could go on. They push through the Dakota Access Pipeline as well. This week they will push through further attacks upon any regulation upon business. They're about to implement trillions of dollars attacks upon basic services, and so on and so on. The point of this meeting is not to go through the horrors of Trump, however, it's to talk about what we're going to do in response to it. Because it's also true that we've seen the revival of mass protests in America. And it's extremely important to recognise what's going on, and that it's going to make sure that there is a challenge to Trump, a very important challenge to Trump. Beginning with the protests on Inauguration Day, on January the 20th, and then the fantastic women's marches that took place the next day, which saw maybe 3 million people march in America, something on that sort of scale. And on a world scale, 5.5 million people, so something of that order. That's a tremendous It's the biggest thing that's happened on a global scale since 2003, the movement against the Iraq War, which is a bit bigger than that, but nonetheless, this is an immense size. Then, in the wake of that, you see the response to the Muslim ban and the attack upon migrants and refugees. You see the demonstrations at the airports, people going to the airports, contesting the fact that migrants weren't let in, offering legal advice to people, showing solidarity with people, filling the airports and protesting and so on, and helping to achieve the legal overturn of Trump's ban. It's going through the courts now, as I say. But the reason why they overturned it was because of the level of protest from below around it, and the continuation of protests that are going on in America. And every day there are serious protests. I mentioned Betsy DeVos was accepted as Education Secretary this week. There were schools, not many schools, but there were some schools where teachers walked out when they heard that Betsy DeVos had been confirmed as the Education Secretary. On the 17th of February, there's an attempt to get strikes against Trump. It's silly to say, will there be a general strike? There won't be a general strike in America, of course there won't. There will be workplace action in America on the 17th of February. Already there have been some strikes. They're contradictory. Some of them are encouraged by the bosses and so on. Nonetheless, it's very, very important. Yemeni shopkeepers and so on, and Yemeni workers filling the streets of New York, for example, very, very important that took place. The fact that at Comcast, one of the technology companies, people walked out. You know, the bosses weren't against it, so it doesn't matter. Workers are beginning to say that they want to take action. And as I say, on the 17th of February, there'll be more of that. And the people who've been involved in Fight for $15 an hour, you know, the fast food workers and so on, will be trying to have something around that time as well. And then on the 8th of March, there's a call from the Women's March for women to stop on the sort of, I don't know if you remember it, there was a magnificent response in Poland when they tried to push through attacks upon abortion rights, where women came out on the streets, there were workers, there were students and so on, came out on the streets and said we're not going to have this, and they pushed back the Polish government. There's an attempt to recreate that in America and in many other parts of the world, particularly in the Republic of Ireland as well, where there'll be a big push to do this over the question of abortion rights in Ireland. But what I'm saying is there's this seething mass, and it's getting more and more radical all the time. There's one place I know about, it's Columbus, Ohio, which is a city of, you could argue about, it's about the same size as Manchester, so, you know, Manchester's what, about 500,000, is it? Something like that? Something like that. The whole area is much more, I know, but Columbus is about 650,000. So it's similar. It begins in Columbus. Before the Women's March, there's a demonstration against Trump. And it's about 2,000 people, and the organisers say we're going to have an utterly silent demonstration, you go home. And that's what they did. 2,000 people stood there, and then they went home. Okay, it's one of the biggest things that's happened in Columbus for a long, long time. Then the airport things come along, and 1,000 people go to the airport, they block the roads around the airport, and they invade the terminal, close the terminal for 2 hours, and have a sit-in inside the airport. You can see the radicalisation straight away about this. And then the next day they had a demonstration of, depending who you believe, 3,000, 5,000, maybe more than that, which marches through the streets, sits down in the main street, and then is attacked by the cops viciously. People are pepper sprayed, and then when they try and get medical attention, for the cops stop them having any medical attention. There's this tumult. So you start in the middle of January with people who think all you can do is stand silently for 20 minutes, and within 2 weeks they're blocking the roads, being pepper sprayed by the cops, and learning all the lessons that you get from that. And this is what's exciting about what's happening in America at the moment. The sense of a mass movement, of radicalisation, of moving simply from street protests. So street protests are extremely important and very central, moving as well into other avenues of resistance. And if you think about previous things in America, the great movements of the 1930s, or the movement against the Vietnam War and so on, it's when it has street protests, but also, for example, goes into the campuses. You know, the campus revolts over the Vietnam War were absolutely central to the sense of resistance against the American state. Again, you can see how it's beginning to happen in the campuses. They saw it in Berkeley, keeping one of the so-called all-right speakers away from Berkeley, of a movement that's beginning to grow inside the campuses. What it raises, of course, is political questions. I mean, you know, this hasn't emerged from nowhere, has it? Of course, it's sparked by Trump, but think back at the last couple of years in America. What do we see? The Black Lives Matter movement, very, very important. Bernie Sanders, contesting for the Democratic presidential nomination, got 13 million votes from the Democrat, nearly beat Hillary Clinton. Let me say, my guess is that if Sanders had been the candidate rather than Clinton, it is quite likely he would have beaten Trump. Yeah. Because one of the crucial things about Trump, for all the horrors about him, was that Clinton was the candidate of the status quo at a time when, for many people, the status quo was utterly intolerable. And therefore, had Sanders been the candidate, Sanders, the man who campaigned on, he was a socialist, certainly not our sort of socialist, but nonetheless he said he was a socialist, said he was for change, said he was for 99% against the 1%, was for free college tuition, was for $15 an hour minimum wage, and so on, that he would have been capable of putting a much better challenge against Clinton. Because remember, Clinton did actually win the popular vote. She got nearly 3 million votes more than Trump did. That's true, by the way. I know that Trump will say, no, that's not a fact. That's, you know, that's just made up because lots of illegals voted. You know, it just one makes these things up if you're Trump, don't you? But it's true, he lost by nearly 3 million. But Clinton lost in some key states where she couldn't mobilise people to vote for her. I think Sanders would have been capable of doing that. So there's a big political argument, particularly about the role of the Democrats. Because, you see, where do these movements go? Is it going to continue to radicalise? Is it going to continue to grow? Is it going to see more strikes? Or is it going to go into, you know what, in 2 years' time there'll be elections in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the crucial thing really is that we all get behind the Democrats. That's the dead end set of politics. That's the politics which will mean the movement doesn't grow and develop. And we have to think about this in our own case. It's not quite as spectacular as America, but it's pretty spectacular, I think, what's happened in Britain. You know, the Women's March was 100,000 people in London. That's fantastic. Fantastic, you know. Very short notice. Not really many of the recognised elements that organised demonstrations and so on. 100,000 people was brilliant. It was a brilliant demonstration. Of course, it's full of mixed political ideas. What new movement isn't full of mixed political ideas and different tendencies and so on? Okay, but something happened there on that demonstration that demonstrated that it was possible to resist. And it came the day before Stand Up to Racism had held very important demonstrations against the racism and Islamophobia of Trump, which were sort of leading to that Women's March. And this is a new movement that has developed in Britain, and it's beginning to show how it's possible to win change. And the reason why I think it's particularly strong in Britain is because Theresa May has entwined herself so closely to Trump. A terrible miscalculation, But, you know, she is the first world leader who flies over to talk to Trump. And then, therefore, everything that Trump does sort of reflects upon her as well. Very foolishly, she then says there will be a state visit, that he's going to come over here. Now, this is becoming one of the biggest rallying points of people to stop Trump coming to Britain. Or if he does come, to have a massive counter-demonstration. When Bush came here, George Bush in 2003, there's something like 250,000 people demonstrated against him. My guess it could be twice as big as that, or more than that, if Trump comes here. I mean, when John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons, makes this vainglorious speech about how against the traditions of Britain it would be to have someone who was a racist and a sexist. Yeah, wouldn't it? Terrible. Against the traditions of the British Parliament to have him here. Nonetheless, the fact that Bercow is forced to do that, is pushed to do that, is because there's been so much protest, because there's been so much outrage at what has been going on. And I think they must be thinking, why on earth did we ever say that Trump would be coming to Britain? And it will be massive, and we have to think about preparing now and for the future around that. And we also have to try and make sure that that mood around Trump links into the racism and Islamophobia of the British state. Racism is not just about what happens in America. It's not just about Trump. Racism is the fact that today, the Tory government, a man inappropriately named Goodwill, who's the immigration minister, said that the Syrian refugees who have been, the child refugees who have been let in under what was called the Dubs Amendment, the amendment that Lord Dubs put through to let more child refugees into Britain, that's now finished. The doors are closing. 300 odd have been let in. That's it. Now that's, the most disgusting actions by the Tory government. The Tory government this week, in an effort to divert away from the crisis in the National Health Service, is saying that the experiment, which has been trialled in some 20 hospital trusts so far, will be rolled out nationally, that the people will have to prove their national identity in order to achieve non-emergency treatment. The subtext being, the crisis in the National Health Service is not caused by lack of funding, or privatisation, and so on. It's caused by the fact that there's all these Nigerian mothers coming here and leeching off the health service. That's a disgusting racist manoeuvre that's going on. And we have to be connecting the mood around Trump to the fact that the British state acts in a racist and Islamic-phobic manner as well, and to campaign against all these things together. You see, the good thing about Trump is he doesn't just attack on one area, he attacks everything at the same time, in the same week, in the same speech, the same day. And therefore, we need to bring together, and this is a very contagious idea, all the different elements of injustice. I'm sure it was the same in Manchester. I was very impressed in London on Saturday, the sense that people were there, yes, because of the Muslim ban, in solidarity with Muslims and against Islamophobia, solidarity with migrants and refugees, but also all the other issues that Trump is about. It becomes this contagious idea that what Trump represents is not just an individual, though he is a particularly abhorrent individual, but he represents a system which is in crisis, particularly in America, which can no longer promise what it promised, for example, in the 1950s and the 1960s. You know the figures. The average wage, the average hourly wage in America today in 2017 is lower than it was in real terms in 1972. In other words, all the decades of progress, of the technological development, of the expansion of human capacity, and people are paid perhaps the same, but probably a bit lower than they were in the 1970s. That's an extraordinary fact. If you are a man over 45 in America, your life expectancy is falling. Again, think of all the developments since the 1980s. Since the 1980s, your life expectancy is falling. And the main reason why is the diseases and causes of despair and hopelessness, addiction, suicide, liver disease, and so on. These are the reasons that are killing people in increasing numbers across the heartlands of America. The American dream, which never really existed, but certainly has been abolished now for vast sections of the population. And this has created a deep political and economic crisis in
America, and you'll also know that it's happening in every other part of the globe as well. The combination of austerity, of the crisis of the banks, of making ordinary people pay for it, expressed as well in political rage. Now, we have a movement in Britain, and we need to get a movement that's bigger in Britain, a bigger political movement. The demonstrations have been good. We need more demonstrations and bigger demonstrations. There's a summit to discuss this on the 18th of February in London, which is very, very important, called by Stop the War and Stand Up to Racism, and a number of Muslim groups, and the National Union of Teachers, and the Communication Workers Union, and the Unite Union, and others. Very, very important. Then on the 20th, the MPs will discuss the two petitions that are in about the Trump visit. There's one which has been signed by around 2 million people saying we don't want Trump to come here. And then there's another one signed by 100,000 people saying we do want Trump to come here. And they'll be discussed. I think, as I understand the rules of the Petition Committee in Westminster Hall, they don't have a vote at the end of it. It doesn't matter, though. There'll be a discussion about it. And then there might be a discussion in Parliament as a result of that. It'll be another big mobilising day on Monday the 20th against Trump, and to say we don't want him to come to Britain. And then on the 18th of March, the Stand Up to Racism demonstrations in London, they're also in Glasgow and in Cardiff, against racism, to connect the racism of Trump, the collaboration of May, and the racism that we see against refugees, against migrants, the state racism, the Islamophobia, to pull that together and say we're against racism, whether it's happening in America, whether it's happening in our doorstep, and we're going to fight together against it, because Trump has brought us together. You can see it happening again in America. The uneasy collaboration around the women's marches, where, you know, many black women felt they were excluded from the initial organising of that, but it ended up with Angela Davis, one of the great black speakers of America, on the platform and speaking in America. And you see that the movement, as it radicalises and generalises, is bringing people together in that way. But we have to be realistic. Trump represents a ruthless, determined ruling class in America, which is not easily going to be knocked off its stride. Not easily. The best example is to cast our minds back to 2006. George Bush, very right-wing president in America, pushed through a bill which was going to criminalise what are called undocumented migrants, people who are in America but don't have the right papers, and anyone who had sheltered them or helped them. It was a very, very nice piece of legislation. In response, migrant workers and those who supported them took to the streets, large demonstrations, 250,000 or more, and then on the 1st of May 2006, a great day of strikes. Probably the biggest single day of strikes that's ever taken place in American history. And migrant workers refused to work, closing down large elements of the meatpacking industry, of the trucking industry, and so on. The result, a nasty government, Bush's government, withdrew the bill. Didn't stop racism in America, of course it didn't. But it was a fantastic victory, and it was won by the fact of mass protest allied to the power of the workplace, seeing people who were both migrant groups and workers groups coming together to fight back and to stop. And that's the model that we need to see rolled out again. And in Britain, this mood against Trump has to reach into the idea about fighting racism here, but also linking up with all the other issues that working class people face. The question of the National Health Service. In crisis, okay, if it's not about migrants, who is to blame for the problems in the National Health Service? It's about May, it's about Jeremy Hunt, it's about the Tories, it's about Virgin Healthcare, it's about generations of underfunding and privatisation. And we're going to fight about that well at the same time. And we're not going to allow it to be driven simply into a movement, either in America or in Britain, about elections, about the Democrats, or about the Labour Party in Britain. I'm delighted that Jeremy Corbyn was elected and re-elected leader of the Labour Party. It was a great expression of the feeling for change. I trust he is still leader of the Labour Party. The reason I say that is because they're trying to get rid of him now. They're trying to get rid of him. They're trying to find a new way to use Brexit as a way to get rid of Corbyn. We need to ensure that the movement doesn't go into saying the only way you get change is to perhaps get Corbyn elected in 2020. Because we know that even if Corbyn were elected, we look at what happened in France with François Hollande, the equivalent to the Labour Party. Look at the chaos that came. Hollande unable to attack the bankers and to stand up against them. Or in Greece, where Syriza, again, came up against the unelected power of the bankers and the bosses and gave in to them. And there's the appalling cuts and attacks and racism that are being carried through in Greece. So we need to build the movement. And by the way, we can't afford disunity in the movement. We can't afford to say that there are 2 or 3 different groups that are going to organise this. We need unity inside the movement, which doesn't mean we all need to agree. It doesn't mean that we can discuss and debate, but we need to be on the street together. We need to be on the street together, organising against Trump and against racism. Doesn't mean you can't have independent groups and all the rest of it with their own initiatives, but we need to come together to get the masses of people on the streets, and then we need to drive that into every workplace, into every college, into every school, into every community to say, we're going to fight Trump, we're going to fight against May, we're going to fight their racism, but we're also going to link that with a struggle for a better world, a world where people come before profit, where we're not going to allow racism to divide us, where we're not going to be turned against Muslims, and we're going to fight to have a world where the tiny minority at the top who seek to divide us to protect their own system are no longer allowed to rule.